I thank the representative of India, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Azerbaijan. At the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Moreno Ocampo, prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, for his briefing and presenting the third report to the Security Council. Azerbaijan is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Nevertheless, we proceed from the strong understanding that the protection of civilians and the respect for international human rights and humanitarian law, as well as the fight against impunity for the most serious crimes, is the responsibility of the international community as a whole. Azerbaijan supports increased attention to these issues at the international level and underlines the importance of steps taken for the protection of civilians, vindications of rights, and bringing to justice those responsible for such crimes regardless of their official status. It's clear that the International Criminal Court's intervention in Libya at the height of the violence strengthened the people's resolve to stop crimes and ensure justice for victims. We welcome the ICC's ongoing fruitful cooperation with the Libyan authorities and commend the government's willingness to render all necessary assistance to the court in the course of its investigation. Azerbaijan fully supports the National Transitional Council of Libya and its efforts towards restoring peace and stability in the country. We believe that despite challenges that Libya is facing in the complex post-conflict environment, the government is capable to overcome inherited problems, promote national reconciliation, and guarantee within the national, legal, and judicial system the effective protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms. We note that the government of Libya is investigating the individuals for the same and additional crimes and the same underlying conduct as the Office of the ICC prosecutor, and that it committed to ensure an effective and genuine investigation and fair trial consistent with the highest international standards. We also welcome complementary efforts of the government to address justice, including the adoption of a transitional justice law, as well as steps taken to address concerns expressed by the United Nations and both national and international NGOs. Needless to say, the due process for those detained must be ensured. It is therefore important that the government managed to make progress towards extending its control over the known detention facilities across the country and the number of detainees, as well as reiterated its commitment to close all unofficial and unacknowledged detention centers as quickly as possible and to take steps to curb maltreatment. In conclusion, we commend the Libyan authorities for their commitment to investigate the incidents identified by the UN Commission of Inquiry. At the same time, we also look forward to the assessment by the Office of the ICC prosecutor as to whether it should conduct its own investigation. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Libya. Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to commence by expressing our gratitude to the United States for organizing this open debate on the situation in the Middle East. Taking this opportunity, I would also like to thank Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Mr. Lim Pasco, for his briefing, and the Permanent Representative of Israel and the Permanent Observer of Palestine for their statements. Madam President, the situation in the Middle East demands constant international attention in in-depth participation in addressing perennial problems and challenges that engulf it. Being a highly complex region in many respects, including geography, geopolitics, ethnic intermingling, as well as simmering ethno-national conflicts, the Middle East for decades has remained at the hub of international agenda. The wave of changes that swept the region since the spring of 2011 became yet another potent factor that absorbed international attention and portended the desire of the Middle East societies for political and societal transformation processes that encapsulated the idea of democracy, equal representation, greater freedom, and wider political participation. We all agree with the potential benefits to be brought by the process of democratic transition in the Middle Eastern countries, However, one should not dismiss the idea that any transition is accompanied by hardships and trials. Therefore, patience, diligence, sturdiness, and political dexterity should be the best tools in making democratic transformation process as smooth as possible and excluding erroneous judgments and policies regarding the region's prospective development. Madam President, turning to more specific issues, we would like to note some progress in the Middle East peace process that was marked with the recent interaction between the Israeli and Palestinian sides on April 17 in Jerusalem after a prolonged hiatus in peace negotiations. In this respect, we would like to welcome the exchange of letters between the parties initiated on this very date and express a hope that the sides will avail themselves of this positive momentum for resuming negotiations. In this respect, Azerbaijan appreciates the consistent efforts of Jordan to revive the dialogue and resume the negotiations. We would also like to note the importance of the quartet meeting held in Washington, D.C. on 11 April 2012 in keeping the Middle East peace process high on the international agenda and express our hope that collective efforts will finally lead to the resolution of the lingering conflict. Among a number of political, humanitarian and security challenges, we cannot but express again our deep concern about continuing illegal settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territories. Needless to say that apart from impact on the rights, freedoms and everyday lives of Palestinians, settlements cause serious damage to the peace process and more dangerously threaten a two-state solution and the emergence of a viable Palestinian state. The situation involving the serious violation of international humanitarian and human rights law cannot go unheeded by the Security Council, and in performing its primary responsibility by the maintenance of international peace and security, this Council must react adequately in order to put an end to illegal practices and policies and ensure that human rights and fundamental freedoms are observed and respected. It is also important to fully utilize the advantage of ethnic, religious, and cultural diversity through promoting intercommunal dialogue and reconciliation, while categorically rejecting and invalidating any manifestation of ethnic and religious intolerance. Madam President, the situation in Syria still occupies the top position in the list of international security issues. We are encouraged by the fact that as a result of tireless efforts of the Joint Special Envoy of the United Nations and the League of Arab States, Mr. Kofi Annan, the sides concerned have committed to ending bloodshed and observing ceasefire after lasting violent clashes. Needless to say that reports testifying to sporadic violations of ceasefire are worrisome, and we will still believe that such instances will remain as isolated cases without further spillover to threaten the current fragile trust. The adoption of the Security Council resolution on Syria, authorizing the dispatch of the advanced team, and later the deployment of the full United Nations supervision mission in Syria, was an expression of a unified Security Council position on this highly crucial matter, and hopes are high that the security environment in Syria will be propitious enough for the mission to carry out its tasks toward monitoring and supporting the full implementation of the Special Envoy's six-point proposal. Madam President, in conclusion, we would like to voice a hope that with more political will, rigorous work and concerted efforts, peace and security will no longer be rare commodities in the Middle East. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank Legal Counsel and Under-Secretary General Patricia O'Brien and the Executive Director of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Mr. Yuri Fedotov, for their briefings, and the Secretary General for his comprehensive report on specialized anti-piracy courts in Somalia and other states in the region. In its resolution 2015 of 24th October 2011, the Security Council determined that the incidents of piracy and armed robbery at sea off the coast of Somalia constitute a threat to international peace and security in the region. The Council emphasized in this regard the importance of finding a comprehensive solution to the problem of piracy and armed robbery at the sea off the coast of Somalia, and decided to continue its consideration as a matter of urgency of the establishment of specialized anti-piracy courts in Somalia and other states in the region with substantial international participation and or support. We take note of the clarification contained in the report of the Secretary General that the term specialized anti-piracy court should be understood to refer to a court operating under national law with international assistance and with a focus on the prosecution of piracy offenses. We note different views of regional states as to the proposed establishment of an extraterritorial Somali anti-piracy court or a regional prosecution center in a third state. Whatever the advantages offered by the mentioned possibilities, the consent of all regional states is an essential prerequisite for successful and effective anti-piracy cooperation. It is encouraging that a combination of measures, including action by naval forces, the improved implementation of IMO guidance, and industry-developed best management practices for protection against piracy, and the imprisonment of more than 1,000 suspects or convicted pirates have contributed to the decline in the number of attacks and to the reduction of successful attacks throughout 2011. Apart from mentioned actions, the national efforts of the government of Somalia and other regional countries and their commitment to combating piracy, the important prosecution role that they are playing and measures they have adopted to effectively combat the spread of piracy should be commended. At the same time, it is important to ensure that national commitments are matched by strong support and assistance from the international community, including inter alia, through contributions to the Trust Fund to support initiative of states countering piracy of the coast of Somalia. Furthermore, it's clear that a sustainable response to piracy of the coast of Somalia requires the re-establishment of peace, security, and the rule of law in Somalia, and social and economic development for the Somali people. International assistance to Somalia remains crucial for the overall success. Taking this opportunity, I would like to express our support to the transitional federal government of Somalia in its efforts to overcome difficulties, to achieve reconciliation, and to build a secure, stable, united, democratic, and prosperous nation. I thank you. Pakistan. No one from Pakistan? The 6,771st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. Under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite His Excellency Mr. Valentin Inzko, High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. Under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite His Excellency Mr. Thomas Mayer Harting, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2012/307, a letter dated 9 May 2012 from the Secretary General transmitting the 41st report of the High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Valentin Inzko.
Thank you, Mr. President. Azerbaijan is deeply concerned at the continuing crisis and widespread violence in Syria that resulted in the death of many people. Despite repeated calls by the international community, the situation in Syria continued to deteriorate, causing scores of deaths and injuries. Azerbaijan has, from the very beginning, supported the efforts of the League of Arab States and is looking forward to their continuation with a view to ending violence, overcoming the crisis, and finding a solution by peaceful means and through dialogue. The only solution to the crisis in Syria is through an inclusive and Syrian-led political process with the aim of effectively addressing the legitimate aspirations and concerns of Syria's people without external interference. This understanding has been clearly expressed in the draft resolution. It is crucial that obligations with respect to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of Syria and all other states in the region are fully observed and respected. It is important that the draft resolution emphasized that the current political crisis in Syria must be resolved peacefully and noted that nothing authorizes measures under Article 42 of the United Nations Charter. Azerbaijan supported the draft resolution on the aforementioned understanding and with the hope that its adoption would contribute to ongoing efforts aimed at encouraging dialogue, overcoming the crisis, and putting an end to human sufferings. I thank you, Mr. President.
I shall make now a short statement in my national capacity. It's unfortunate that the representative of Armenia has attempted to use the opportunity of our debate for making groundless propagandistic statements. It's well known that international Armenian terrorism has bloody historic antecedents connected with the perpetration of numerous terroristic acts in various countries and killing of thousands of innocent people. I would like to inform the Security Council that yesterday we submitted a letter to the Secretary General containing the information on the facts testifying to the organization and implementation by Armenia of numerous terrorist acts against Azerbaijan and other countries. This information gives an opportunity for Council members and the broader international community to make own assessment at the matter and decide on the hopelessness of the Armenian propaganda in this attempt to mislead the United Nations in general and the Security Council in particular. There are no more speakers since I resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more speakers inscribed on the list of speakers. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. The meeting is adjourned. I thank the representative of France. I give the floor to the representative of Togo. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Togolese presidency for convening this important open debate on women, peace and security. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, Ms. Margaret Wallström, and the Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operation, Mr. Hervé Lazzous, and Ms. Amina Meherbi for their statements. Civilians are entitled in all circumstances to respect for their persons, their honor, their family rights, their religious conviction and practices, and their manners and customs. They are to be at all times humanly treated and protected, especially against all acts of violence or threats thereof. The reality, however, is different. Indeed, a defining feature of most, if not all, conflicts is still the failure of parties to respect and ensure respect for their obligations to protect civilians. Civilians continue to suffer from inadequate protection in situations of armed conflict, including discriminatory treatment, torture, sexual violence, extrajudicial execution, mass population displacement, and ethnic cleansing. In many situations of armed conflict, sexual violence has been used as a weapon of war to strike terror and to force civilians to leave their native lands. Azerbaijan strongly condemns all acts of violence committed against women and girls, including in situations of armed conflicts. It is imperative that all parties to the armed conflict strictly abide by their obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. Azerbaijan's interest in the issue under consideration is obvious and stems from its efforts to contribute to achieving sustainable peace and development under its practical experience of addressing the impact of armed conflict on civilians, including women and children. In 3 days, we will commemorating the 20th anniversary of atrocious crimes committed against the Azerbaijani civilians of the town of Khojaly, where during one night hundreds of civilians were killed only because they were Azerbaijanis. Even women and children were not spared by the invading troops. In its resolution adopted in 1993 in response to the occupation of Azerbaijan territories, the Security Council referred especially to violation of international humanitarian law and attacks on civilians. We are confident that consistent measures being taken at the national level, as well as the existing international legal framework, will serve to bringing those responsible for crimes in Khojaly and other grave offenses committed during the occupation of Azerbaijan territories to justice. It is incontrovertible today that any official or political status does not cloak the person concerned with immunity for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community. Mr. President, the adoption by the Security Council of the landmark Resolution 1325 was an important milestone which took up women and peace and security as a separate thematic issue and brought international visibility to the plight of women and girls in situations of armed conflict. The subsequent Council's resolution, presidential statements, and other relevant documents have contributed to developing a solid framework and raising awareness of the impact that sexual violence has on victims, families, and societies. The heightened vulnerability of civilians in wartime, in particular forcibly displaced persons, refugees, women, and children, brings an element of urgency, dedication, and strong commitment to our protection efforts, which must be free of selectivity and politically motivated approach and preferences. Azerbaijan notes the role that the mandate of the Special Representative of Sexual Violence in Conflict must play in this regard. Among the pressing issues requiring urgent action and attention is that of women taken hostage and reported missing in connection with armed conflict. We are continuing our efforts to address that disturbing phenomenon, including through the relevant biannual resolution of the General Assembly and the Commission on the Status of Women, of which Azerbaijan is a main sponsor. In this regard, I would like to recall that the Commission on the Status of Women at its 54th session inter alia called for the immediate release of women and children taken hostage in armed conflicts, including by strengthening international cooperation to this end. More resolute and targeted measures are required to end impunity for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community, including those committed against women in situations of armed conflict. Combating impunity is important not only for the purposes of prosecuting such crimes and bringing those responsible to justice, but also for ensuring sustainable peace, truth, and reconciliation. I thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Togolese presidency on convening this debate on piracy in the Gulf of Guinea. I would also like to express our gratitude to Mr. Pasco, Mr. Musa, and Her Excellency Ms. Florentina Adenike Okonda for their briefings. We are grateful to the Secretary General for dispatching a United Nations assessment mission to the Gulf of Guinea to assess the scope of the threat of piracy in the region, as well as for the comprehensive report that the mission has submitted. The findings and recommendations of the mission require careful consideration. Incidents of piracy and armed robbery in the Gulf of Guinea have risen significantly in recent times, making the area the second most acute piracy problem on the African continent. Increasing number of piracy attacks, in addition to transnational organized crime, including illicit weapons and drug trafficking, constitutes a serious threat to peace, security, and economic development of both coastal and hinterland states in the region. We note political will at the highest level in the individual regional states and their determination to combat this threat and cooperate to that end. Measures and initiatives undertaken at the national and regional levels to mobilize international attention to this problem and enhance maritime safety and security in the Gulf of Guinea should be commended. However, as the assessment mission concluded, most countries in the Gulf of Guinea cannot alone prevent or manage effectively the threat of maritime security in their coastal waters. Indeed, one of the characteristics applying to the piracy proceeds from a concept of collective responsibility to fight against this form of criminality that affects all states. It is therefore important that the regional states and organizations be provided with a substantial assistance from the international community. Azerbaijan stressed the importance of affirming the respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the states of the Gulf of Guinea and their neighbors. With reference to the report of the assessment mission, we note that many states of the region are cautious as to the possibility of international naval response in the Gulf of Guinea to prevent potential pirate attacks. The United Nations plays an important coordinating role and should continue and intensify its engagement and work in the region to help the states and organizations of the region to act and mobilize international support, including the convening of the joint summit of Gulf of Guinea states to develop a regional anti-piracy strategy. We agree with the mission's view that any viable or lasting regional strategy may need to take into account the root causes of the problems in the regional countries. In addition, for any comprehensive strategy to take effect, it is essential that the countries of the region further strengthen their interaction, cooperation, and coordination, as well as develop a legal framework for the prevention and repression of piracy and armed robbery at sea. I thank you.